You've tapped into the Suffolk Stream, where creativity flows. So take time, have fun, and enjoy as we delve below the surface to bring you the people, crafts, events, and culture making waves in Suffolk's creative current.
Today in the Suffolk Stream studio we have H.E. Ross, or to give him his proper name, Herman Eugene Ross. And I can see why he just wants the initials. H.E., as we say in Suffolk. How do you describe what you do?
How do I describe what I do? I guess it would depend on which thing that I do.
Okay, which thing do you do?
Well, for a long time of my life, I was a sailor who used to write, and I'm a writer who sails. So
Are you talking about Navy?
Well, no, sail.
Sail.
S-A-I-L. Actually,
Yes. Right,
not motorboat sailing, even though people
proper
do.
sailing.
Yeah,
With
proper is
sails.
an English word, isn't it?
It is an English
Use it
word.
a lot. Yeah, I'm a sailor, basically. That's what I've done for 46 years. I guess that makes me a sailor. And I've sailed in a lot of places and on a tremendous number of boats, different types of boats. I prefer wooden boats. Right now we have an iron one, actually. Actually the last two boats we've had have been steel and iron. But aside from that, usually I do traditional boats and I do traditional sailing, and that's what my line of endeavor is. I guess it's almost occupation, is maritime heritage. That's what I do.
How do you make a living out of that?
Don't.
Yeah.
I basically I've been to the Cayman Islands and Turks and Caicos and San Francisco. I started the first thing. And we started institutions, and the institutions of preservation of maritime history and heritage. That is what we've done. That's what I've been doing for the last 30 some odd years.
And you started off in San Francisco.
I'm from San Francisco, and I was actually leaving San Francisco when I found out about a guy having a thing called BAMI, B-A-M-I, and he needed to have some people to try to get youth groups in the lower income areas of San Francisco involved with his organization. I went to it, and I found this guy crying on his desk because he couldn't get any money, couldn't get any funding, nobody wanted to talk to him. He couldn't get out into the groups, he couldn't get into the funky neighborhoods and talk to anybody without getting hurt. So he was just this red-haired, that sort of tells you his race guy, trying to get into black neighborhoods and it wasn't working. So he had this gigantic pier sitting there, and he had all the facility for doing this stuff, but he couldn't get anybody to come. So I sort of was leaving San Francisco to go to the Caribbean to start a thing called Project ISIS.
Did you sail there?
No, I was going to be flying.
Oh, okay.
No, I wasn't going to do that then. I did it later.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did it later. But this was called Invisible Sailors, Invisible Ships, which is ISIS. So it was a 14-stage project that I was starting out on.
This was a stealth program, wasn't it?
This is a program that's still going on.
No, I mean,
That's
invisible
worked into the
sailors,
program
invisible
and then-
ships, how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. Right now I do a blog called Black Folk Don't Sail, which is essentially along the same lines. It's recording a history of people who aren't usually recorded in that particular history, so I do black maritime history. At the BAMI, I actually initiated a program where we were doing Filipino history and heritage, Chinese, Irish, Scottish, and all of the components of San Francisco itself. It's a big variety of people that used to live at that point in time in San Francisco and who always intermixed. So it was a thing where, because of the intermixing, some of the cultural things would disappear. Not so much with the Chinese or the Japanese, but definitely with other peoples in the city, including the Irish to some degree. Except the pubs sort of made those stay alive. But
yes.
Aside from that, there were things in their maritime history that just weren't around anymore. And the Chinese had a large history in San Francisco on the sea, on the bay, and bringing food in, which the Italians eventually took over after the Portuguese did. So they had all those histories, and we were bringing them into the BAMI to start talking about those histories and bringing children in so that they would hear those histories. And that's where I got the basis for a lot of the ways that I did the other four institutes that we started.
I was in San Diego a couple of years ago, and somebody had just taken off the ocean bed some round stones, which they thought were the anchor stones for medieval Chinese ships. And this was complete turning history on its head so far as most people were concerned, because everybody knew that sailing started with Christopher Columbus, and certainly all these foreign people thought they went sailing as well.
I found that out in England too.
Peculiar.
I mean,
And then Nelson,
Columbus,
obviously, he was the next one. We had a little bit
That's
of
right.
disagreement with the Dutch. We let them sail in history, but they didn't do very well.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, because when you come into words like schooner and sloop, they're Dutch. And then you come into places like Woodbridge, and it's Danish. So you have this weird thing.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's sort of interesting, because you do have, we do have here in Woodbridge, the either first or second, there's an argument between the two, oldest replica, or oldest sailing vessel, the remains of the oldest sailing vessel in British history. And it actually predates the Viking, which nobody seems to bring out. I always wondered why they don't, because it's an important fact, that it predates the Vikings. So it's sort of an interesting little thing about what you were just talking about in Columbus, in that the history here might not really be, it's just scratched but not really pulled out. And that's what we were doing there in the Caribbean with the particular islands, is especially Cayman, which because of the tax label of the country itself, there wasn't very much emphasis on the past 60 years. In the Caribbean usually don't go past 60 years in the history, even though it might be 300 years of history. It's 60 years as your grandfather telling a story, essentially, and that's as far back as you go. So we were sort of pushing it a little bit further, and got absolutely nowhere in Cayman, so we had to sort of stop around 60 and 70 years and just deal with the turtle industry, which is what they were doing. And that's what I based most of my research on in the Cayman Islands at that point in time. And that spanned over 15 years, 5 years not being there, but I was still doing the work.
And there were specific styles of ships for catching and trading turtles.
Yeah, and the market was the United States. And that was basically always in Cayman history, the turtle was part of that. Because the ships coming back in the 17th century, coming back to Europe, would pass the Cayman Islands, all ships. There was no real flag flying in Cayman during that time, except for maybe the pound sign or the,
of course,
or whatever happened,
yes,
or the franc, or So they would come there. It'd be neutral territory. All your pirates were there. Mary Read, Anne Bonny, Blackbeard, all those guys came there, and they basically traded for a turtle, because turtle you can take back across the ocean alive. You keep them on their back, and you feed them water.
Okay.
So that was a very important industry, which a very astute person in Key West picked up on, in Key West, the United States and Florida. And he started having the Caymanians bring turtle up to Key West, and they made a turtle soup, which they used to send across to England all the time. And you allowed a turtle soup here. And then the turtlers actually stopped turtling about 20 years before the Endangered Species Act came into effect.
Turtling, this is a real word.
That's a real word, with no G at the end.
No.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's tortling with an O instead of a U, and no G at the end. But tortling was what we emphasized, and the catboat was what we emphasized with that, which is how they went out and got the turtle.
I've heard of catboats, but I don't know what they are.
Yeah, there are two different types. One is in the northeast, which is a big, broad boat with one sail, called a una sail, and a flat stern. And then there's the Caymanian one, which is pointed, narrow, and one sail, but sometimes with two.
But why cat? Not a turtle boat?
Well, the legend in Cayman is that the guy who built the first catboat, which in the 30s, or I guess in the 20s, had a cat that used to go out and live in it all the time, so he just called it the cat's boat, then it became the catboat. But that could be a lot of rum.
I don't know. I remember seeing an engraving of some beaver trappers around about the time of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So really early 1800s. And these two rough, tough buckskin guys in their canoe with their traps and their long Kentucky muskets. And on the prow of the canoe, on a long string, was their cat.
Oh, that's nice.
It was nice.
That's a nice story. That's a lot better than the other one, I think, with the cat boat in there. I don't believe that, because there were a whole bunch of boats that were similar rigs before that particular person built that particular boat. It's just the Cayman catboat has a difference in the bow structure and the stern structure than most, and that's so they could go up over reefs. And that's the other part about maritime history and heritage itself, is that there isn't any nationality attached to boat design.
No.
And all of it is interchanged. And that does create a one world type of a concept, which what I like. I like that concept being from San Francisco. You know?
So
that's how it all relates.
The different ship designs and boat designs depend on the water rather than the nationality, I
That's right.
imagine.
Unless you're getting into the war aspect of it and the naval practice of building ships and why they're being built. If you're not doing that and you go into the commercial aspect, which is the majority of it, most naval ships are built on that premise. And also most navies were built out of the privateering of the commercial vessels, including the Royal Navy. If you're doing it from the commercial boats, which aren't recorded very much because they weren't wealthy people and they didn't have a national concept or image to portray, then you would get these interchanges between the Netherlands and Spain and Africa and France and all this intermixture of stuff, because Spain was being ruled for 700 years by Africa, so those particular designs moved up into the Netherlands when they ruled the Netherlands. So it's all this interchange of stuff that doesn't get recorded because you're more nationally focused in history.
Yes.
So what we did in Cayman and in Turks and Caicos is sort of bring all this out. The Haitian sloop moved into the Turks and Caicos to some degree. The Bermuda definitely moved in Turks and Caicos with the Bermuda sloop, which is the predecessor of the Marconi brig, this triangular sail. The foreign.
Is that what the Bermudan rig means?
That's what it
A
means.
triangular sail.
It does mean that, even though it has a little leg of mutton at the top, it's still called a triangular sail. And the Bermuda sail was developed to go to the Turks and Caicos. So that was a gigantic step in the turn of history itself, in maritime history. Is this thing, this non-reliance upon the square sails like they show in all the pirate movies, to this sail that could cut into the wind and go 800 miles to get salt to come back, so that people could preserve their food to get back across the Atlantic again.
So the difference between the triangular and the square sail is you can go into the wind rather than just in the direction the wind is going, is that right?
That's right.
Phew.
So you knew that.
I did actually listen in sailing class at school.
Well, see.
I wasn't captain of the sailing team for nothing.
Neither was I.
No.
That's good. I never joined the team.
When did you discover what you wanted to do? The maritime history has become your life, clearly.
Definitely. I think when I first sailed, when the very first time I went sailing, because the guy that I went sailing with was a Dane, and a guy had said to me at one point that sailing should be what I do. I look like I would look good on a boat kind of thing, and I didn't have anything to do. I was 21, so I started calling people and tell them I wanted to buy their boat. I didn't really have any money to buy the boat. I just said. And then I started sailing, and I kept going. I'd be sailing 6 times a week sometimes.
This is in San Francisco Bay.
In San Francisco Bay, which is a pretty strong bay, pretty strong sail.
Yeah.
But this guy was completely drunk at 10 o'clock in the morning, and he took me out and just let me sail the boat, and I didn't know what I was doing. I ended up out in the ocean.
There are some savage currents in that bay.
Well, not like here, but up to 6 knots.
Yeah.
Here you can get up 20 knots right out here in this river. But
It's not marked dangerous for nothing, this river.
Demons are pretty strong. You need to know what you're doing. This particular boat was a Danish Spitzkette, a double ender, and that was a very traditional fishing boat out of the North Sea. They used these little 24-foot boats to go out in the North Sea and fish. So these were really good boats, and the boat taught me how to sail. It just immediately got me hooked into it, because the guy was drunk. He was down below drunk, and we had to come back in out of the ocean and all this. So the boat did it. And
You had to learn fast.
But then I started looking at different boats by calling all these people and having them going out sailing with them. And to me, the traditional fishing-based vessel or commercial vessel made a lot more sense than any other thing I ever did. So I automatically went in that direction when I bought my first boats. And when you're buying a boat, you look into it, what it is, and why it is, and so you're already hooked into the maritime heritage part.
Was there a point in your life when you thought, I can make a living out of this?
No, including up to now. But when I moved to Point Reyes up in Tomales Bay, north of San Francisco, and that's where I started writing. When I started journalism, was writing maritime columns. And I did one called Scrimshaw and another one called On the Waterfront. So I just went around, and anybody had a boat, I did interviews with them, and started really getting more into the history of why they had a particular design that they had. And I was sort of partial to wooden boats, so I never really talked to the people with fiberglass boats, and I just stayed off in that area. And when I got back down to San Francisco again, I was doing a lot of, I do demonstrations for fiberglass boat companies and their boats. I take the people out and they go sailing, and I do sailing lessons for them too. And we also did charters on the bay. That was all fiberglass. It convinced me I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
It's a lot easier to work with, surely.
No, it's the opposite. No. There was a survey done, and it comes out to about the same price if you're talking both things, wood and glass fiber. But glass fiber doesn't have much of a life. You know, the sun kills it. Salt water deteriorates it. So you're not actually in the right element for that particular product. Wood, the sun doesn't kill it, and salt water actually matures it and keeps it, if it's good wood. And if it's well constructed, then you have 100 years, 150 years.
As long as
not 9 or 20.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little bit different.
So what are you doing at the moment?
Right now I'm writing. I'm finishing a novel, which has the maritime stuff. And I have 2 books that I'm trying to come out with that have, one is Turks and Caicos Maritime History, and one's Cayman Maritime History.
What's the novel about?
About a guy who's taking a traditional boat back to islands that they just purchased, and he's got a crew on board of Americans, and he's black and they're white, and they're on a microcosm. They're on a little tiny piece of an island there, which is the boat, and how they come down, how they make that trip, and what's involved in making the trip between the people that are on the boat, and also when they touch land, and what he sees and what they see about what's going on Earth today. And it sort of stays around Mexico a lot. I lived in Mexico for a long time.
Okay.
But
You're living in Suffolk now?
We're living in Suffolk, we're living in Woodbridge.
What brought you here?
Hmm?
What brought you here? Don't say the time.
I actually thought, almost, we actually put a book out called Eventide. About 40 years ago I came to England looking for a boat. Went up and down the coast and went to Malden and all the different places that I saw, Yarmouth, Great Yarmouth, and all along the other coast down to Devon. And saw some beautiful boats, wonderful boats, and unfortunately my wife at the time and I didn't agree on buying the boats, which resulted eventually in a divorce. But I had this image in my head of England and maritime heritage and how it was really a strong part of the country. So after 40 years, I sort of came back indirectly. My wife is from London, so we went to London. We had a shipwreck because of 2 hurricanes in 1 week with the boat we had.
This is a real shipwreck?
Yeah.
Oh.
I met her with a shipwreck, and a different shipwreck. We had 2 shipwrecks. But the first shipwreck was...
And this didn't tell you anything?
Yeah, it told me that I should take more care. That's what sailing does. But we had decided, we decided to get a boat, and we got a boat in Morocco, and we stayed over there in Spain a little bit, and we found the dream boat, the boat that we always wanted, that I always wanted. And it was sort of a thing where I'm getting too old to do too many more boat type things, and we got 1 child at that point, and we wanted to have that type of a life for him, where it's freer, and the children that are around are more into doing things with their hands and their minds, and not just looking at computers and stuff. So we're sort of moving into looking for spots along this coast we could keep the boat that we would want. And this seemed to be a maritime-based culture in Woodbridge. So we bought this boat, and I'm not really sure how now even, but we bought this beautiful 65-foot on deck, 85-foot overall Dutch sailing barge, and we brought it from Berlin here through the Netherlands and across the North Sea. And we brought it directly here, and we've been here ever since. It's almost 3 years. Sorry, I got something in my eye here. Her name's Aina Tekonder, that's the name of the boat. And she's down here at Robertson's, which is the oldest boatyard in Woodbridge. So we're up to 5 boatyards in one little tiny place. I think that's very interesting.
Like most of Suffolk, it didn't used to be a little tiny place.
No.
The coast changed.
Yeah.
And these used to be big, as you know, big sailing towns.
Well, they used to build over 200 and 300 foot ships right up here.
Yes,
On
up
this
to
street.
150 tons or something.
Yeah. And they would come down the hill. That's how they'd launch them. Yeah, no, this
I
is
can't
very-
imagine that at all.
I can't either. That's not about sitting on the mud with 3 foot
Yeah, I was
drafts.
going to say.
Yeah, no.
And the double yellow lines and
The whole thing. Yeah. And the traffic going the other way. And the lights that sometimes work. But
yeah.
good to see the lights going green than a 300 foot ship. I don't think you can see it.
Are you
But-
collaborating with other creative people on these projects? In
The
Suffolk?
project that we have right now, which we're trying to initiate, and I don't know what this is, maybe it's the sand from the Sahara in my eye here, but
Yeah.
we're trying to do a thing called the African race. And the African race, and this is such a preliminary stage of it, it's almost not worth mentioning, but we did do a lot of the figures on it to begin with, to start the thing off. It's a project where we thought the best way to have a lot of different concepts come together in one would be to have something that would feature on a fairly large scale a race that would actually sail from somewhere in the African area, in that diasporic area, to itself, make a circle. And the circle would come across the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, and come over to basically the Caribbean, and go up to the States, all the way up to Canada, and come back down again to England, and then England back down to Africa, and make a complete circumnavigation of the North Atlantic. And the main point of it would be that you'd be on, if you were to become part of a crew of one of the boats that would be sponsored and in this race. And it'd be one particular type of boat, an open 50. You would pay for your crew position, which would also have the obligation of every time that you go to one of the 17 or 18 ports that would be stopovers, to participate in youth getting on board the boat and learning how to sail a racing boat. And also having part of the presentations that we would be giving on maritime history that's related to the last place you were at and the place you're going. So all of those things would be combined in a grand circuit tour that would actually be a race. The reason we're calling it the African race is the obvious one of it being the African race, but also that basically 98% of all of our DNA is traced to Africa. So anybody who wants to admit to have one tiny little drop of African blood in their system is eligible to race in the race. And at the end of it, there's $1 million kind of a trophy type thing. So it's not a little bit of money involved in it.
That's a lot.
No, each boat is going to be at least $750,000. I have to talk more in dollars. But $750,000 to sponsor, to really get a boat going all the way around this. So if you can have 15 boats in it, you've got quite a bit of money already that's there. And the outlay in 17 countries to organize different presentations and people coming, that's all in it. And so that's what I'm saying, it's at such a preliminary stage, it's almost not worth speaking about. But we do have that foundation, that concept of what it is. And now we're working on basic figures and then personalities, and also letters to all the different organizations that would have to become involved in this. And we're choosing which organization will be the one that would actually be the overall head.
That's going to be quite a project to coordinate, isn't it?
Well, luckily, UNESCO has just come out with a whole 10-year period of appreciation of the slave trade. So they're focusing on the slave trade itself, where this doesn't focus on the slave trade, but one part of it is the Middle Passage.
I've heard this expression, the Middle Passage. What actually is it?
Well, it turned into several things, but the Middle Passage was from Africa across the Atlantic that was the Middle Passage, because you have
Africa.
the north and
Big place. Which
there's
would
a current that goes this way.
Oh, okay.
And the top of it is the North Atlantic and the bottom of it is the South Atlantic. In between that is, right on the edge of it, is our trade winds. Is a trade wind route. That trade wind route was called the Middle Passage before slavery and after slavery. But because it was such an easy way to get from, say, Senegal across to Barbados, it was the Middle Passage became the slave route. The Middle Passage itself is basically about 1,700 miles, which, if you go back into maritime history, you go to Bobakari and the Mali Empire, and him giving up his kingdom in order to get in 400 ships that they sailed across to the Western Hemisphere way before Columbus. So you had that aspect that's there too. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes with each area of this route, which is why to me it's an exciting thing. And the title itself sort of, as far as what are considered white people are concerned, when you say the African race, there's always this sort of hesitancy in being nice. So that's nice. If you're going to be nice about something in the beginning of it and not run away, it'll be.
Did my face say that?
I think most faces do. Even black people don't typically like to hear that African race thing.
It's hidden history, though, isn't it?
It's very hidden, and that's the reason for the invisible sailors and invisible
Yes,
ships.
that's all making sense.
Yeah. I hope it does.
It does indeed. H.G. Ross, thank you very much indeed.
Anytime.